Hey everyone, welcome back to Valley of Secrets. I'm your host, Nikki Ruth. And if you're new here, I am really glad that you found your way to this space. When we left off in last episode, Willie was making regular trips into Vancouver, hauling animal waste to the rendering plant, and using those drives as an opportunity to cruise through the downtown Eastside, watching the woman working the stroll. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, I'd strongly recommend pausing here and going back to that episode first. It really lays the groundwork and gives you the full context of what and who we're dealing with in this story. Before we continue, I do need to give another content warning. What we're about to talk about is disturbing on many levels. This case involves violence against women, exploitation, and deeply traumatic details. Please take care of yourself while listening. Pause if you need to, and come back when you're ready. This is part 2 of the Robert Willie Pickton story. It's March 22nd, 1997. It's one of those damp coastal nights where the cold settles into your bones. The streetlights along East Hastings cast everything in a dull orange glow, and the sidewalks of the downtown Eastside are alive in the way they always are. People moving, negotiating, surviving. The downtown Eastside has often been described as the poorest postal code in Canada. A handful of city blocks marked by poverty, homelessness, mental illness, hazardous substance use, crime, and survival sex work. It is a place many people talk about, but few truly see. On this night, a 31-year-old woman whose straight name was Stitch is standing on the corner of Cordova and Princess Street in Vancouver. She is not there because she wants to be. She is there because she needs money. Addiction does not pause for dignity, and survival does not wait for better options. A red pickup truck pulls up beside her. The driver appears to be in his late 40s. He's balding with greasy, thinning hair hanging down the sides and back of his head. There is nothing particularly remarkable about him at first glance. He simply asks her how much she charges for oral sex. Stitch tells him that the going rate is $40. He offers her $100 if she will go back to his place in Port Coquitlam, otherwise known as Poco. Poco is roughly a 40-minute drive away, and that distance does matter to her. Leaving the familiar streets of the downtown East Side for an isolated location really can increase the risk significantly. Stitch hesitates and suggests they find somewhere closer, but he insists and promises to have her back in the city by 1 a.m. $100 is difficult to refuse when you are living in survival mode, so Stitch gets into the truck. The two make small talk as they start the drive to Poco. Stitch notices Smarties and a soft drink in the middle console and asks the man if she can have it. He obliged, but then she also noticed that there was a bra on the seat beside her, and when she asked whose it was, the man replied that it belonged to another working girl. The city lights slowly fade behind them as they head farther into the suburbs, and Stitch starts to begin feeling uneasy. Although she was only 31, she has lived a far heavier life than her years suggest. She began using drugs in her teens and became involved with 2 men who are about 10 years older than her and already had criminal records. They were arrested for stealing cigarettes and other goods. And during that time, Stitch gave birth to a daughter with one of these men. According to an obituary, that little girl died as a toddler, and the loss devastated her. For a period, Stitch retreated further into drugs, but her story does not end there. Vancouver is a port city, and at one point she found work on a local fishing boat as a deckhand and a crew cook. She began a relationship with the captain and gave birth to 2 children with him. For several years, her life held some stability. There was work, there was routine, there was family. However, the pull of addiction remained strong, and when the relationship eventually broke down, Stitch made the painful decision to leave her children with her father so she could seek help for her cocaine and heroin addiction. She wanted desperately to see her children again, but recovery proved far more difficult than she had hoped. She eventually found herself living once more in the downtown Eastside, among many of society's most vulnerable and marginalized people, attempting repeatedly to get clean, relapsing along the way. By that cold night in March of 1997, Stitch was sustaining her drug use through theft and sex work, doing what she needed to do to survive another day. As the truck continues toward Poco, Stitch asks the man if he can stop at a gas station so she could use the bathroom. He refused and continued driving. Eventually, this truck slowed down and turned onto a property secured by a padlocked gate. The man got out, unlocked it, and drove through. Stitch didn't realize the property was a farm. To her, it looked like a junkyard. There were old vehicles, scrap metal, and debris scattered around the property. He parked beside a mobile trailer home and gestured for her to come inside. The interior was filthy, a pigsty, she thought. The air was stale, and the clutter covered most surfaces of the house. As he led her toward the kitchen, Stitch noticed a large butcher knife lying on the table. He took her into a back room where there is no bed, only a sleeping bag on the floor, with a thick roll of plastic beside the sleeping bag, like a rolled-up carpet. Sounds kind of strange to me. He gives her the promised $100, then they ended up having intercourse instead of the oral sex that they had originally planned. At that point, nothing appeared overtly violent or unusual. Afterward, she got dressed and asked if she can use the phone to call her friend, to which he said that she couldn't. Too many women have called long distance in the past, he said. He offered to drop her off at a payphone when taking her back to Vancouver. So then she asked if she can use the bathroom, since she still needed to go really badly. When she was in the bathroom, she locked herself inside. Stitch tried to inject a mix of cocaine and heroin into her vein just below her knee, but missed and didn't get high. She then asked if she can use the phone book to call her boyfriend. While doing so, she sensed him standing behind her. He gently took her left hand, caressed it, and without warning, he snapped handcuffs around her wrist. In that instant, Stitch understood that she is in serious danger. For a brief moment, she froze. Then instinct took over. Stitch fought through hardship her entire life, and she needed to fight right now. She started punching and kicking him, reaching for anything within arm's length that can serve as a weapon. As they struggled, she found herself backing toward the kitchen table where she had earlier noticed that butcher knife. She grabbed it and slashed him across the neck and the cheek. Blood began to flow heavily, and he took a cloth and pressed it against the wound, but continued fighting her. They wrestled violently for control of that knife, and during the struggle, Stitch blacked out. When she regained consciousness, she was outside near the pickup truck. The man was on top of her and restraining her with the knife. She screamed and begged for him to let her go. She felt his strength start to falter and seized this opportunity to grab the knife and slide out from underneath him to get away. Stitch staggered down the driveway covered in blood. She does not comprehend the extent of her injuries. She had actually sustained 4 deep stab wounds, 2 to her abdomen, 1 to her rib cage, 1 to her punctured lung, a cut on her arm, and severe blood loss. Adrenaline masked the pain and propelled her forward with one singular goal: escape. Fearing that the man may come after her, she limped across the street and knocked on the door of a nearby house. There was no answer. She attempted to break a window to get inside, and as she did that, headlights were approaching. At first, she was scared that it might be him, so she ducked down, terrified. But as the vehicle got closer, she realized there was 2 people in there, and one of them in the passenger seat happened to be a woman. It was not the man from the farm. Stitch runs out into the road and screams for help. The car immediately stops, stunned by looking at this woman who was small in stature, partially unclothed, covered in blood from head to toe. Her intestines were actually hanging out of her stomach, holding and thrashing a large butcher knife around. Stitch immediately throws the knife to the ground when the man asks her not to stab them. And then the man opens the back door and helps her into the vehicle. As they called 911 for police and an ambulance, Stitch pointed toward the property across the street. She tells the woman that if anything happens to her, the man living in the trailer is responsible and that he is also injured. Stitch is rushed into emergency surgery, and against overwhelming odds, she survives. And her survival would expose one of the most notorious predators in British Columbia. Now, let's go back to where this all began. If you were standing on East Hastings Street in the 1980s, you would feel it before you even understood it. It was 8 blocks long, about 6 blocks deep. That was the heart of Vancouver's downtown Eastside, a place people whispered about, a place politicians avoided, and a place the city pretended not to see. This is where all the addicted came when there was nowhere else to go, where women worked the stroll because they needed to survive another night, where mental illness and poverty weren't treated, they were warehoused. And for sex workers, especially Indigenous ones, it became a hunting ground. There on the corner of Hastings and Vernon Street was a hotel. Officially, it was called the Vernon Rooms, and unofficially, people called it the Ho Den. It was owned by Hells Angels member Doug Vickers, and the rules were simple but brutal. If a woman brought a John inside, she paid a cut. If she needed drugs, she bought it from him. And if she didn't follow his rules, she was violently beaten as a lesson. That was the ecosystem. Exploitation layered upon exploitation. And in the middle of it all, women started to disappear. At first, it was quiet. A girl hadn't been seen in a few days, and another hadn't checked in with her friends or family. But these weren't women the system valued. They were sex workers, addicts, drunks, diseased, mentally ill individuals. So when they vanished, it didn't trigger alarms. It barely triggered paperwork, sadly. By the mid-1980s, sex workers on the stroll knew something was terribly wrong. Many were going missing, and then bodies began to turn up in back alleys, bushes, industrial sites. In 1982 alone, reporters would write that 14 sex workers had been found dead. 8 strangled, 5 stabbed, 1 bound and tortured. All remain unsolved to this day. 2 journalists at the Vancouver Sun, Kim Pemberton and Neil Hall, kept asking the question no one wanted to answer. Was there a serial killer targeting these women? Police didn't like the word serial killer and wanted to focus their attention on cases that were quote-unquote worth investigating, suggesting that these missing Indigenous sex workers weren't important enough to investigate. So because police weren't doing their job, sex workers started keeping their own records, and they tracked bad tricks and reported them to the police. They wrote down license plate numbers, and they warned each other about men who assaulted, robbed, or strangled women who ended up surviving. They became their own detectives and their own early warning system. By 1989, around 70 women came forward with information. Police told them that they were looking into it, but nothing changed, at least for a while anyways. One man would eventually be caught. His name was Gilbert Paul Jordan. He was a local barber in his late 50s, quiet, unremarkable, known to drink more than a bottle of vodka a day. He would pick up women from the downtown East Side, take them to a bar, and then to a hotel for sex acts. He would then pay them to drink copious amounts of alcohol until their bodies shut down and they died of alcohol poisoning. Gilbert Paul Jordan was convicted of manslaughter in the death of 1 woman only, but he was linked to at least 9 others. They called him the, quote, boozing barber, unquote. But he clearly wasn't the only serial killer targeting sex workers from the downtown Eastside, because many more women went missing after Jordan was caught. On February 14th, 1991, something powerful happened on East Hastings Street. Community members gathered for a memorial march to honor missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and 2SL LGBTQIA+ people. It was an act of grief, but also of resistance, a refusal to let these lives be erased or dismissed. That march did not end in 1991. It became a tradition, a movement, a yearly reminder that these women mattered and still matter to this day. As I'm recording this on February 14th, 2026, it has now been 35 years since that first march. 35 years of families, advocates, elders, and community members walking those same streets in remembrance. And I think that is such a powerful way to honor them. Because while systems failed them, their names are still being spoken, their lives are still acknowledged. And every February 14th, the streets that once held so much silence are filled instead with memory, love, and accountability. On August 22, 1991, Nancy Clark was 25 years old, was last seen in Victoria, BC on Vancouver Island. Nancy was a mother to 2 young kids. One was 8 years old and the other was 8 months old. She was known to be a sex worker on the Victoria streets to provide for her kids. The following day actually happened to be her oldest child's birthday, and when she didn't show, right away her family knew something was very wrong and reported her missing. Nancy's DNA would later be found in the Pickton property, making her the first known victim of Robert Willie Pickton. At first, police didn't link her disappearance to Willie, as she was taken from Victoria. But what police didn't realize yet was that Dave Pickton, Willie's younger brother, had a contracting job on the island and had taken Willie with him on this trip. Sadly, that trip cost Nancy her life. By this point, the amount of missing women was piling up, and law enforcement couldn't ignore it any longer. So the police department partnered with the RCMP to take a closer look at 25 unsolved murders of women connected to the downtown East Side. They created a task force called Project Eclipse. And this wasn't a small internal review. They had brought in criminal profilers, they consulted experts from the FBI. For about a week, investigators gathered to analyze case files, autopsy reports, timelines, and crime scene locations. They examined the patterns, they debated similarities, and they looked for connections. One of the key people involved was a young Canadian officer named Kim Rosmo. Rosmo had already spent years policing the downtown East Side. He knew the streets intimately, where people congregated, where they slept, where they worked. But what set him apart was how he thought. He was deeply analytical and was working on a new approach that would later become known as geographic profiling. His idea was this: serial offenders are rarely random wanderers. They tend to operate within areas they know well, zones that feel familiar and accessible. If you chart the locations of crimes carefully enough, you can start to see a pattern that might point back toward the offender's base of operations. So that's what they did. They mapped the murders, they grouped cases by similarities, and they analyzed the clusters. And what emerged was deeply concerning. Within one grouping of 4 similar homicides, the team concluded that there was likely at least one serial killer responsible, possibly more than one predator operating at the same time. When the findings were presented to leadership within the Vancouver Police Department, the expectation was that this would change everything, that additional resources would be deployed, and that there would be this urgency to find out what is happening to these women, that strategies would shift. But that is not what happened. According to later accounts, the response was muted. There was no sweeping mobilization, no dramatic restructuring. The information did not ignite the kind of decisive action you might imagine it would have. Rosmo would later reflect that part of the problem may have been practical: limited staffing, competing priorities, and finite budgets. But he also suggested something more uncomfortable. that the department may not have known how to integrate this kind of innovative analysis into their traditional investigative framework. Geographic profiling was new at the time. It required technology, modeling, and a willingness to rethink conventional approaches. It meant that acknowledging publicly that a serial predator could be targeting marginalized women in Vancouver, or maybe more than one serial predator. Instead of reshaping the investigation around those conclusions, it appears the report was largely sidelined. And while meetings ended and files were closed for the day, women in the downtown Eastside continued to disappear. Around 1994, Lisa Yeltz came into the picture again for Willie. He had known her as a child, as her grandfather would frequent the Pickton's meat locker, but they reconnected again in the early 1990s when Lisa moved on Dominion Avenue. Lisa was an ex-sex worker herself and was raising 2 teen boys after she had been divorced. One of her sons was friends with David Pickton's son, DJ, who was spending more time with his dad at the farm by this time. Lisa and Willie became close friends, doing ordinary, everyday things together. But later, she stated that Willie did make her feel uneasy at times. He reminded her of Ed Gein, the serial killer that kept the skin of his victims, but one that also had a strange closeness to his domineering mother and had an abusive father, much like Willie had. Lisa would become one of many women that were called into question when Willie Pickton was finally arrested years later. While Willie was busy befriending Lisa and meeting up with sex workers, Dave was busy running his demolition company. He had a few people working for him, one being named Scott Chubb. Scott grew up in Sparwood, Alberta, which was a small town. And in that small town, he went to school with a girl named Angela Jardine, who later does become one of Willie's victims. After high school, Scott started snorting cocaine and ended up with a really bad drug addiction. He eventually moved to Vancouver in 1994 and was desperate for work. So he went into an employment office and found an ad for driving trucks 7 days a week for a large excavation project. It was to last 9 months, and his boss was none other than David Pickton. After hours, Scott hung out at the farmhouse drinking and smoking dope with the other workers. It happened to be a place where everyone seemed to hang out to relax. Around this time, Dave and Willie were not getting along, and in one big argument, Dave kicked Willie out of the farmhouse. So, what does Willie do? He goes and sleeps on a freezer in the shed for months. Dave eventually bought a motorhome, and Willie lived in that near the back of the property, and Dave stayed in the farmhouse. This way, they each had their own privacy and stay out of each other's way. Despite the filth, despite the junk piles, despite the rotting equipment and the smell that reportedly clung to everything, women were constantly coming and going from the Pickton property. Women who were willing to do domestic work like laundry and cleaning, if they could stay on the farm. One of these women was Tanya. Tanya knew the Picktons because her stepfather worked on the farm slaughtering pigs. Willie was kind enough to let her live with him in that small motorhome for 18 months. Tanya described their relationship as like an uncle and a niece. They slept in separate areas in the motorhome, and there was no sex. She trusted Willie. Tanya said there was a constant stream of people coming and going on the farm, and she often returned to the motorhome very late at night to find that Willie wasn't there. She would testify later that she just assumed that he was working late. She had no idea that he was meeting sex workers on the downtown East Side. By 1995, the number of missing women from Vancouver's downtown East Side was becoming alarmingly impossible to ignore. That year alone, 4 sex workers had vanished. 3 of them, Tracy Oligid, Tammy Lee Pipe, and Victoria Yonker, were later found in the Mission area. If those names sound familiar, it's because I covered their case in my episode The Hemlock Murders. Their bodies were discovered in a wooded area, discarded like they didn't matter. The 4th woman, Mary Liguer, was eventually found much farther away. Her skeletal remains were located on Mount Seymour in North Vancouver. As investigators worked through leads, Willie Pickton's name surfaced as a possible suspect. At the time, however, there was no DNA evidence tying him directly to those victims, and he was released. And that's what makes this so unsettling. Because even then, in 1995, Willie Pickton's name was already circulating. On December 27, 1995, 20-year-old Diana Melnick vanished. She was 5'2", 100 pounds with short brown hair and brown eyes. She had a love of horses and grew up going to a private school. In her teen years, Diana got into drugs and became a survival sex worker in the downtown Eastside. Her DNA was later found on one of the freezers and on the plastic liner inside the freezer on the Pickton farm. Meanwhile, back on the farm, Linda, Pickton brothers' older sister, had become a successful realtor in Vancouver and took the opportunity to sell 3 parcels of land off the Pickton property, totaling $5.1 million. Today, that would actually be about $9.5 million. The Pickton children were now wealthy and able to do what they wanted with that money. Dave Pickton chose to buy a nearby property with a large metal shed. He converted it into a dance hall and bar for his biker friends and locals to hang out. He called it Piggy's Palace. At its peak, Piggy's Palace could roughly hold 150 people. The barn was transformed into a party venue with live bands, endless alcohol, and plates of barbecued pork that Willie and his associate Pat Casanova proudly served. Word spread quickly, and the gatherings developed a reputation as wild, anything-goes events. The guest list was a strange mix: bikers, drug dealers, sex workers, local business owners, off-duty police officers, and even the occasional city official. At one point, the mayor of Poco made an appearance. Not everyone was impressed. Neighbors complained about the pounding music and the row of Harley-Davidsons parked outside late into the night. The city attempted to intervene and shut the parties down, but David Pickton pushed back hard. He framed the events as fundraisers for charity and insisted they would continue, and they did. For Willie, Piggy's Palace represented something he had rarely experienced before: attention and acceptance. For years, he had lived largely in social isolation, often described as unkempt, muddy rubber boots, blood-stained clothing, a scruffy beard, and a grin that people found unsettling. But as money from the events flowed in, his appearance began to change. He started wearing newer clothes, cleaner jeans, and seemed to be taking a little bit more care of himself. He even invested in a costly hairpiece to conceal his balding head. With his newfound confidence and cash, Willie decided it was time to move on from the aging motorhome he had been living in, so he purchased a larger mobile unit, upgrading his living situation to bring sex workers back to. It's October 1996, and Tanya Hollick was 21 years old, beautiful with dark curly hair, brown eyes, and a big smile. She grew up in Agassiz and Chilliwack, and her mother was part of the Skatine First Nations in Pepperton. In her teen years, they moved to East Vancouver, where she finished high school. But her family had a lot of tragedy. 2 uncles committed suicide, and her aunt went missing from the downtown Eastside in 1978, never to be found. Tanya had a 1-year-old son when she disappeared. She struggled with drug addiction and did sex work on Vancouver's downtown Eastside to survive. On October 29, 1996, she asked her ex if he could keep their son for 3 nights instead of the regular 2, so that she could attend a Halloween party, and he agreed. Tanya did not return home on November 1st to pick up her son, so her mother reported her missing. Tanya's clothing and DNA were later found on the walls of a freezer in the Pickton's workshop. Tracy Bowen lived at the Astoria Hotel in Vancouver Eastside, a place where Willie frequented. Tracy was 5'10" with red hair piled up on top of her head. She looked put together with her makeup well placed. She was actually married, but both her and her husband were addicts, and so she did sex work to bring home money for the family. She also had 5 kids that lived in Victoria, and she wanted nothing more than to get clean and get her kids back. One night, to her surprise, Willie asked her for oral sex. She knew Willie, but he had never tried to pick her up before, but she agreed to go with him. She states his truck smelled horrible, and his trailer was no better. She had trouble getting past all the garbage in his house to even get to his bedroom. After they were done, she was startled when Willie suddenly accused her of stealing his wallet, grabbed a knife, and sliced off a couple buttons on her shirt. She quickly escaped and left the trailer, and then Willie sauntered out with her purse and drove her back to Vancouver like nothing happened. Tracy states that Willie told her he liked to help working girls who were drug addicted, that he gave them one chance to change, and if they went back to drugs, then they were useless and better off dead. Tracy never reported the incidents to police, but she did tell the woman at the Wish Drop-In Society, which was an organization supporting sex workers. They immediately put Robert Willie Pickton on their bad tricks list. 1997 was the worst year. Over 12 women went missing off the downtown Eastside. Constable Dave Dixon was a beat cop in the area and started to notice that women were going missing and started marking down their names. In January 1997, 20-year-old Stephanie Lane went missing from the Patricia Hotel on East Hastings Street. She had grown up in Vancouver to a Métis mother and a mixed-race father. She was 5'4" and weighed 115 pounds, very beautiful with long, dark, curly hair and brown eyes. She was an A+ student who loved singing and acting when she was in school. After graduation, Stephanie worked as an exotic dancer at the No. 5 Orange, which is a popular strip club in Vancouver. According to Stephanie's mother, Michelle, she fell in with the wrong crowd and started using heroin. She became pregnant and had a son, Stefan, who was only 9 months old when she disappeared. Stephanie's DNA was found in a freezer on the Pickton farm. In March 1997, Kara Ellis was living in the Hoden with her friend Maggie Giselle. Kara was born in Calgary, Alberta, but after her parents' divorce when she was just 5 years old, she moved around to different family and foster homes, and then eventually engaging in sex work and drug addiction on the downtown East Side by 13 years old. On the streets, she was known as Nikki Trimble. Kara was one of the women who had been buying drugs outside of the Hoden, and Doug Vickers ordered his thugs to beat her up. She was hospitalized for a while. Kara was last seen on March 10, 1997, but wasn't actually reported missing until August that year, as her family didn't realize she was missing. She would often go for long periods of time without contacting her family. Kara's DNA was later found on Willie's jacket and on items in the slaughterhouse and in the freezer on the Pickton farm. Just a couple weeks after, Stitch's incident would happen. On March 22nd, Sandra Gale, otherwise known as Stitch, was rushed to the hospital and into surgery. All of her clothes were taken into evidence. The handcuffs were still connected to her wrist at this time. At 3:17 a.m., a second patient came through the emergency doors. It was Robert Willie Pickton, and he went into surgery himself. He had suffered many injuries. He had a slash across his throat from ear to ear, one also from his ear to his mouth, cutting off the tops of teeth and part of his jawbone. There were 2 stab wounds in his arm and 1 in his back. While he was in surgery, an orderly collected Willie's clothes and gumboots and handed them over for evidence. While going through the pant pockets, he found a small key and gave it to the police officer. Immediately, they thought about the handcuffs on Stitch, and the key opened the handcuffs with ease. Within hours, police had a search warrant for Pickton's trailer, where they grabbed all the evidence that they could find. The next morning, police were at Stitch's bedside asking her what happened. She told everything except for the fact that she was there for sex work, because she was afraid that they would keep the $100 and she really needed that money. They gave her back the $100, but they kept the drugs that they did find on her. Stitch tried to kick her drug habit while being in the hospital, but it wasn't long before addiction took over. However, she never went back to sex work again. Willie was also questioned. He stated that Stitch tried to rob him and stabbed him, so he had to defend himself. by the time that Willie was going home from the hospital, Dave actually needed someone to clean up the trailer because there was blood all over the place. And he also needed somebody to look after Willie while he recovered because he was busy working himself. So Dave called Willie's old friend Lisa Yelds, who by now had moved to Surrey. She was seeing a man who was just released from prison and had shot 2 small girls behind a fence. She apparently knew nothing about that, though. She had no car insurance, so Dave actually offered to buy it for her, and with lots of pressure, she obliged and came to look after Willie. Willie was angry and wanted revenge for what Stitch had done to him. Lisa told him to let it go. Eventually, she went back to her place, and she was never paid by Dave for looking after Willie. Willie was charged on April 8, 1997, with 1 count of attempted murder and unlawful confinement and aggravated assault. He hired Peter Ritchie, the most expensive and prolific criminal lawyer in Vancouver at the time. They also hired a private detective to get background information on Stitch. The court case was set for January 28, 1998. It was known that Stitch was terrified of Willie, and she didn't show up to the court case. Therefore, all charges against Willie Pickton were dropped. Before we end today, I want to take a pause, because this story isn't just about one man. It is not about a farm, and it's not about failures in policing. It is about women. Women who were daughters, women who were mothers, women who loved music, who loved their children, who laughed loudly, who had favorite songs and favorite foods, and inside jokes with their friends. Some of the women we talked about today were named: Tracy Olajide, Tammy Lee Pipe, Victoria Yonker, Mary Lidguer, Nancy Clark, Diana Melnick, Tanya Holick, Stephanie Lane, and Kara Ellis. And there are so many more. Some whose DNA was found, some whose remains were never recovered, some whose files have gathered dust, some whose names were barely written down at all. Many were Indigenous, many were struggling, many were surviving the only way they knew how. None of them deserved what happened to them. If there is one thing I hope you take away from this episode, it's this. These women were not disposable. They were not less than. They were worth every bit of an investigation. They were not statistics. They were human beings. Whether their case has been solved, unsolved, or still waiting for answers, they all deserve to be remembered. Thanks for listening to part 2 of the Willie Pickton case. Join me in 2 weeks for part 3, where I will talk about more of these missing women and the systemic failures. If you would like to contribute to this podcast, you can donate a small monthly fee. The link is in my social media bio or in the show notes. Any amount is appreciated and helps keep this podcast going. You can also find photos on this case on my Instagram and Facebook at Valley of Secrets Podcast. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and stay curious.